Lyra was walking through the bustling hallways of the Intergalactic Academy, her thoughts consumed with the upcoming class. As usual, she felt superior to most of the students around her. She was from Virelia, one of the most advanced planets in the galaxy. Virelia had been around for thousands of years, with technology far beyond what any of the other species could imagine. The Academy, a place where beings from different planets came to study, was a daily reminder of just how superior her people were. Today was no different. Lyra had already made her mark in the class and was confident that she would continue to outshine everyone. She was known for her quick mind and sharp tongue, traits that made her a favorite among the professors and students alike. Her blue skin, pale as the moonlight, shimmered under the lights, and her silver hair flowed with every step. She was a vision of grace, beauty, and intellect. But then there was Eli. Eli was human, a mere earthling, no different from any other of his kind. To Lyra, humans were just primitive. Earth had been a quiet, forgotten planet in the galaxy for centuries. Humans were still learning to travel beyond their own solar system, and their technology was nothing more than outdated machines. It was a mystery to Lyra why humans even bothered coming to the Academy. They had so little to offer compared to the advanced species like hers. Lyra sat in her usual spot at the front of the classroom, her eyes scanning the room for anyone who might need her attention. She could see Eli sitting at the back, hunched over a pile of papers. He was always quiet, always distant. He never spoke much, and when he did, it was always with an awkwardness that made everyone else in the room uncomfortable. Lyra had often found herself laughing at his strange ways. Why would someone like him even bother attending a prestigious academy? As the professor began the lesson, Lyra allowed her mind to wander. She found herself glancing over at Eli again. He was scribbling something on his papers, completely unaware of the stares he was receiving. His messy brown hair fell into his eyes as he bent over his work. It was hard to believe that someone who looked so ordinary could even be in the same room as her. The professor's voice broke through her thoughts. And now, for the next part of our lesson, the evolution of civilizations across the galaxy. Lyra sat up straight, her attention fully focused. This was always one of her favorite topics. She had spent years studying the rise and fall of galactic civilizations, the advanced species that had shaped the galaxy. She couldn't wait to contribute her insights. But just as she was about to speak, Eli raised his hand. Lyra narrowed her eyes. What could he possibly want to say about the evolution of civilizations? Was he even aware of the topic? The professor nodded at Eli, and he stood up, his posture awkward. Well, I think humans, we developed slowly. We didn't have the kind of technology that some other civilizations did, but we adapted. We made the best of what we had. Lyra rolled her eyes, barely containing a scoff. Typical, she muttered under her breath. Humans, always acting like they're special. They think they're so different from the rest of us. The professor smiled at Eli, apparently impressed with his response. Lyra could hardly believe it. Did the professor actually think humans had something to offer in this conversation? Eli was nothing more than a simple earthling, with no real understanding of the galaxy's complexities. Interesting, the professor said. Indeed, humans have faced many challenges, but they have survived and thrived in their own way. A lesson to us all. Lyra's patience was wearing thin. She turned her attention back to Eli, who was still standing awkwardly, eyes cast down at his shoes. He didn't seem to notice her watching him, and for a moment, Lyra felt something unexpected, a strange curiosity. But she quickly pushed it aside. Eli was just a human, after all. His opinion didn't matter. What did matter was how advanced her species was, how much they had accomplished. If humans wanted to pretend they were part of something grand, let them. But in the grand scheme of things, they were nothing. The rest of the class passed without incident, but Lyra's thoughts remained on Eli. Why had he said what he did? It was just so human. It was as if they had no real understanding of the galaxy's true potential. Lyra wanted to brush it off, to focus on the things that really mattered. But there was something about his simplicity that irked her. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Lyra gathered her things and stood up. She glanced over her shoulder at Eli, who was slowly packing up his bag, still unaware of her gaze. A small part of her wondered if he ever questioned his place in the galaxy. Did he ever wonder why he was here, surrounded by beings so much more advanced than he? Lyra shook her head, clearing the thought from her mind. "He's just a human," she whispered to herself. "Nothing more." But as she walked out of the classroom, the words lingered in her mind, haunting her. What did Eli know that she didn't? The days after the lesson on planetary evolution passed quickly, and Lyra found herself thinking more and more about Eli. She couldn't help but wonder about him, despite her best efforts to ignore the thoughts. It was strange. She'd spent years studying at the academy, mastering every subject, and yet here was a human, someone she had always considered beneath her, occupying her thoughts in a way that she couldn't shake. She couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was his awkwardness, or maybe it was how he seemed to know things that didn't fit his primitive nature. Lyra knew he was intelligent, but there was something else about him that didn't add up. Humans were supposed to be weak, easy to underestimate. That's what she'd always been taught, and that's what she had believed. Yet here was Eli, still silent, still strange, and still making her feel uneasy. One day after class, Lyra decided she'd had enough. She couldn't just keep wondering about him. She was going to find out what made him tick, and she would do it by confronting him. Eli often spent his free time in the academy library, poring over old Earth texts, most of which were poorly translated. It was odd. Humans were never really interested in their own history unless it had something to do with survival. But Eli was different. He spent hours reading, always with the same quiet determination. It puzzled Lyra. She made her way to the library, walking with purpose. But when she arrived, she found Eli sitting in his usual corner, nose buried in a book. He didn't notice her as she walked over to him. His focus was entirely on the pages in front of him. Lyra stood there for a moment, watching him. His messy brown hair fell over his eyes as usual, and his face was set in concentration. His posture was slouched, but there was something in the way he read, something that suggested he wasn't just passing time. With a deep breath, Lyra finally stepped forward. She cleared her throat, startling Eli, and he looked up, blinking as if he hadn't expected anyone to approach him. He quickly straightened, his cheeks turning a shade of red. "What are you reading?" Lyra asked, trying to sound casual, though she could feel her heart racing for reasons she couldn't understand. Eli glanced down at the book in his hands, then back up at her. "Just some old Earth history," he said quietly. "Nothing special." His voice was soft, but there was a confidence in it that surprised Lyra. He seemed so calm, so unbothered by the situation. Lyra tilted her head, intrigued. "Why Earth history?" "It's not exactly the most fascinating subject in the galaxy." Ellie closed the book slowly, giving her a shy smile. "Maybe it's not fascinating to most people, but to me it's important. Earth might be a small planet, but it has its own stories. Stories of survival, of growth, of how humans have managed to make it through countless challenges." Lyra crossed her arms, watching him carefully. "Survival?" she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Survival? You humans had nothing to offer the galaxy for centuries. What could you possibly have survived that could compare to the struggles of more advanced species?" Eli's smile faded slightly, but he didn't look away. "Maybe it's not about comparison," he said. "Maybe it's about how we face our challenges, even when we don't have the advantage. Earthlings aren't the most powerful, but we've learned how to adapt. We've had to." Lyra narrowed her eyes, something stirring inside her. She had always seen humans as weak. They were no match for the Varelians or even the other more powerful species. And yet, here Eli was, speaking as if humans had some kind of strength that had eluded her understanding. "You're wrong," she said, almost to herself. "You can't compare yourselves to the rest of us. We've built civilizations that have lasted millennia. Your species is still just getting started." Eli didn't respond right away, and for a moment, Lyra thought he might just let her words slide. But then he spoke, his voice steady.
"Maybe, but you can't deny that we're still here."
"We didn't give up, no matter what, and maybe that's something worth looking at." Lyra frowned, staring at him. She didn't know what to say. She'd never thought of it that way before. All she had ever seen was a species that seemed destined for failure. But Eli's words, they made her question everything she thought she knew. "I never expected you to understand," Eli added, breaking the silence. "But I don't expect everyone to. I guess it's just something I've learned to accept." Lyra opened her mouth to argue, but something stopped her. There was a weight in Eli's words, an honesty she had never expected from a human. For a brief moment, she saw him not as a joke, not as something to be looked down upon, but as someone who had faced the same struggles she had, just in a different way. "I never meant to insult you," Lyra said, her voice softer than before. It was the first time she had ever said those words to him. It was a strange feeling admitting she might have been wrong. Eli blinked, clearly surprised by her response. "It's okay. I know you didn't mean it like that," he said with a small shrug.
"I don't mind. I've heard worse."
Lyra felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Eli had every right to hate her for the way she treated him, but instead, he was calm, understanding. There was something about him that made her want to know more. "You know, you're different from what I expected," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. "I always thought humans were beneath us. I never really considered your history, your strength." She paused, then added, "I guess I've been wrong about you." Eli smiled faintly, the expression warm but a little sad. "Maybe we've both been wrong about a lot of things." There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time, Lyra felt like they were on equal ground. Eli didn't see her as the perfect, superior Varelian he had once known. And for the first time, Lyra didn't see him as the weak human she had always thought him to be. The days following their conversation in the library felt different for Lyra. There was a shift in her thoughts, a subtle change that she couldn't quite understand. Eli was no longer just a human. He wasn't the object of her ridicule anymore. Now he was someone she found herself thinking about more often. It wasn't just his quiet demeanor or his strange way of seeing the world. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. Lyra had always prided herself on being in control. She had always been the one to hold the upper hand in any situation, especially in interactions with other species. But with Eli, it was different. He didn't care about power or control. He didn't fight for dominance like many of the other beings at the academy. Instead, Eli spoke from a place of genuine understanding and honesty. That, more than anything, intrigued her. One afternoon, as Lyra was walking through the academy's gardens, she saw Eli sitting alone on a bench, reading one of his books. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she pushed the feeling away. It wasn't like her to feel nervous. Still, something about Eli made her feel vulnerable in a way she had never experienced before. When she reached him, Eli looked up, a faint smile forming on his lips. "Hey, Lyra," he greeted her, his voice calm and inviting. Lyra nodded in return, but didn't speak immediately. She was still processing everything they had discussed in the library. "Mind if I sit?" she asked finally, surprising herself with the question. "Not at all," Eli replied, shifting slightly to make room for her. He seemed so comfortable in his own skin, so easygoing. It made Lyra feel a little out of place, but she sat down anyway. For a moment, they sat in silence. Lyra couldn't help but glance at Eli, wondering if he could sense the change in her. She wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between them, especially after all the times she had mocked him. But she had to try. "You know," Lyra began, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in the library." She paused, then looked at him. "About Earth. About your people. I've always thought humans were weak, but now I'm not so sure." Eli turned his head slightly as if processing her words.
You don't have to apologize, Lyra.
"I understand where you're coming from. I've always known that most species don't see humans as anything special. But we've made it this far, we've faced everything that's been thrown at us, and we're still here." Lyra's brow furrowed as she tried to grasp his words. "But you're not as advanced as the other species," she said, her voice soft but still carrying a trace of doubt. "Your technology isn't on the same level as ours. You haven't been around as long." Eli nodded slowly, his eyes focused on the ground. "You're right. We're not as advanced and we're young compared to the other civilizations. But that's the thing. We don't need to be the most powerful or the most advanced. We've learned how to survive without those advantages. We've learned how to adapt to whatever comes our way." Lyra looked at him, her thoughts swirling. She had never seen things from this perspective before. In her world, power and technology meant everything. Without them, a species was nothing. But Eli's words were making her rethink everything she had ever believed. "I never thought about it that way," Lyra admitted. "I always thought that power came from strength, from technology, from being the best." Eli smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I think a lot of people believe that. But maybe the real strength comes from how you handle the challenges you face. It's not about being the strongest. It's about not giving up when everything seems impossible." Lyra's mind raced. She was beginning to understand Eli in a way she hadn't before. There was something in his words, something in the way he spoke, that made her realize how little she had truly known about humans. "Eli," she began, her voice more thoughtful than before, "I used to think that the galaxy was divided into the powerful and the weak, that the strong ruled and the weak just followed. But now I'm starting to see it differently. Maybe humans are stronger than I thought." Eli's expression softened, and he looked at her with a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "We're not perfect, Lyra. Far from it. But we're still here, and maybe that's what matters." Lyra nodded slowly, her thoughts swirling as she absorbed everything he had said. There was a quiet strength in Eli that she had never noticed before. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from brute force or advanced technology. It was a strength that came from within, a strength that allowed him to keep going, even when it seemed like the odds were against him. The sound of footsteps in the distance interrupted their conversation, and Lyra looked up, breaking the moment. "I should probably get going," she said, standing up from the bench. Eli nodded, his eyes still focused on her. "Yeah, me too. But thanks for sitting with me. It was nice talking." Lyra smiled, the feeling unfamiliar but not unwelcome. "I'm glad we talked. Maybe we could do it again sometime." Ellie's smile grew, and for the first time, Lyra didn't feel like she was looking down at him. She felt equal. It was a strange but comforting feeling. "I'd like that," he said. As Lyra walked away, she couldn't shake the thoughts racing through her mind. She had always believed in the superiority of her species, in the idea that only the strongest, the most advanced civilizations mattered. But now, she was starting to see the flaws in that thinking. Eli had opened her eyes to something she hadn't expected. Humans weren't weak. They were resilient. Girls, and that resilience was something Lyra was beginning to admire. Lyra could hardly focus during the following days at the academy. Her mind kept drifting back to her conversations with Eli, the human who had changed everything she thought she knew about her place in the galaxy. It was a strange feeling, this tug at the edges of her certainty. Eli's quiet strength, his perspective on survival and resilience. It had all left an impression on her that she couldn't shake. She had always seen herself as a model of superiority, a member of the Varelian race, a species that had long been the center of knowledge, power, and technological advancement. Yet, despite all of that, here she was, questioning the value of those very qualities. Eli, with his simplicity, had shown her that there were other kinds of strength. And what's more, humans had it in abundance. In the days after their meeting in the garden, Lyra started to seek out Eli more. It wasn't like her to be so persistent, but something about him made her want to learn more. She would find him reading in the library or working on projects in quiet corners of the academy. Each time she saw him, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Not in the way that she had once dismissed him, an easy target for ridicule, but as a person, someone who had something worth hearing. One afternoon, Lyra decided to approach him again. She had noticed him reading a thick book on ancient Earth civilizations, something she had never thought to pick up. She stood in the doorway of the library, hesitating. She felt foolish for what she was about to do. What would she even say? But before she could stop herself, she walked in, her steps echoing slightly on the stone floor. Eli looked up as she approached, a faint but welcoming smile on his face. His calmness always put her at ease even when she felt so uncertain. "Hi, Lyra," he greeted her. "Hey, Eli," she replied, her voice steady. She stood there for a moment, unsure of how to start. "You're reading something about Earth history again?" she asked, motioning toward the book in his hands. Eli nodded, not the least bit surprised by her interest. "Yeah, it's about the ancient civilizations. It's fascinating how Earth's people, despite their lack of advanced technology, created such complex societies. They did things with what they had. It's inspiring, in a way." Lyra found herself listening intently. It was strange how something so simple could captivate her so much. "Inspiring?" she asked, intrigued. Eli looked at her, his eyes lighting up as he spoke. "Yeah?" They had to survive without the resources or technology we take for granted. But they made art, built cities, created laws, and fought to protect their people. It wasn't easy, and they didn't always succeed, but they kept going. They kept trying to get better. Lyra felt a twinge of something in her chest as she heard his words. There was a kind of truth in what Eli was saying. She had always been taught to value strength, power, and technology. But this was different. Humans hadn't built their world on strength alone. They had built it on something deeper. "Sounds like they were more resilient than I gave them credit for," Lyra admitted, almost to herself. "They were," Eli said, nodding. "And so are we, in our own way." There was a silence between them then, a moment that hung in the air, filled with understanding. Lyra realized that in the short time she had known Eli, he had changed her perception of her own species and the galaxy. Humans had something that Lyra had overlooked for so long. It wasn't their power or their advanced technology, but something more. Something that came from the heart, their determination to survive, no matter the odds. "I never thought much about it," Lyra continued, breaking the silence. "I used to think that the strongest, the most advanced, were the ones who mattered. But now, I see that strength can come in many forms." Eli smiled softly, his expression kind. "It's not about being the strongest, Lyra. It's about how you face the challenges that come your way. And I think that's what makes humans, well, human." Lyra nodded slowly, taking in his words. She had spent so long believing in her own superiority, in the superiority of her people, that she had never truly considered what it meant to struggle, to fight against all odds. But now, with Eli's quiet wisdom, she was starting to understand. Days passed and the academy became the backdrop for something much bigger than academic lessons. Lyra and Eli spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing at all. They discussed Earth's history, the challenges their species had faced, and the strange ways in which the galaxy was constantly shifting. Eli never tried to prove anything to Lyra. He simply shared what he knew, and in doing so, he taught her more than she had ever expected. But soon a new problem arose, one that was far greater than anything they had discussed so far. One afternoon, as Lyra was walking through the academy halls, she overheard a conversation between two professors. Their voices were low, but the words they spoke were unmistakable. "The invaders are coming," one of the professors said, a note of fear in his voice. "The fleet has already begun its approach." If they find Eli, Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of these invaders before, but never in such a direct context. She had always thought of them as a distant threat, something that could never reach her or her people. But now the situation felt real. It was too close, too immediate. "What do they want with him?" Lyra asked, stepping forward to join the conversation. The professor turned to her, his face grim. "Eli's bloodline is ancient. His ancestors fought against these invaders when they tried to conquer the galaxy centuries ago. The invaders want him to prevent that from happening again." Lyra's mind raced. Eli, this quiet, unassuming human, was the key to stopping a galactic invasion? She had always thought of him as just another student at the academy, but now she realized that he held the legacy of something far greater than anyone could have imagined. She found him soon after, sitting alone in their usual spot in the garden. His head was bent, and his eyes were closed as if he were lost in thought. Lyra approached him cautiously. "Eli," she said softly. Eli opened his eyes and looked at her, a small smile forming on his lips. But it quickly faded as he saw the concern on Lyra's face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Lyra hesitated. "There's something you need to know. The invaders are coming. They're after you." Eli's expression turned serious, and he sat up straighter. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for a while. They've been tracking me." Lyra's heart sank. "You never told me." "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want you to get involved," Eli replied, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I didn't want anyone to know how dangerous this could be. I didn't want you to look at me differently." Lyra reached out, placing a hand on his. "You don't have to carry this alone, Eli. We're in this together now. You're not just a human to me anymore. You're someone worth protecting." Eli looked at her, his eyes filled with something that Lyra couldn't quite describe. It was gratitude, yes, but there was also something deeper, something unspoken. He didn't need to say anything. They both knew the gravity of the situation. "We'll fight this together," Lyra said, her voice stronger than it had been before, and for the first time, she truly believed it. Humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors, capable of facing the greatest threats the galaxy had to offer.